Jewish people have been expelled from more than 100 countries throughout history. They've had their homes, lands, businesses, bank accounts, documents, and even the clothes on their backs ripped away from them. They were left on the streets with absolutely nothing, literally nothing. And yet, every single time, in every new country, in every passing generation, they rebuilt from scratch. Not once, not twice, but hundreds of times over thousands of years. How is it possible that a group of people who lost everything time and time again always ended up with more than they had before? The answer isn't luck. It's not connections. It's not inheritance. The answer lies in something they are taught from the time they are children, something most of the world completely misses. By the end of this story, you will understand exactly what that secret is. But more importantly, you'll know how to apply it yourself, even if you don't have a single penny in your pocket right now. In the summer of 2001, in a gritty, working-class suburb of Detroit, Michigan, lived a man named Joseph Miller. Everyone called him Joe. He was 41 years old, had a wife named Grace, 3 kids, and a mountain of debt that kept him awake every single night. Joe had spent 18 years working at an auto parts factory as a heavy machine operator. He would clock in at 6 a.m., slip into his blue Dickies uniform, put on his safety glasses and earplugs, and spend 10 grueling hours in front of a massive hydraulic press that stamped out metal components with a chest-rattling boom. The smell of industrial oil stained his skin. He would come home smelling like raw iron and pure exhaustion. He'd kick off his steel-toed boots at the door, scrub his hands 3 times with heavy-duty soap just to get the grease out from under his fingernails, and collapse into a plastic lawn chair on the porch, drinking a cold glass of iced tea while Grace warmed up dinner. 18 years, half of his adult life. And in those 18 years, Joe had only managed to secure the bare minimum. A modest, weathered fixer-upper house with an unfinished back porch he always promised he'd build out one day. A white 1989 Ford Taurus that sputtered and coughed every time he turned the key. A boxy 21-inch TV where the kids watched cartoons in the afternoon. A wall phone with a long, tangled cord that Grace stretched all the way into the kitchen when talking to her sister. And an old refrigerator that hummed like a motorboat engine but kept the milk cold. He wasn't rich, but he didn't complain. Joe was the kind of man who believed complaining was for the weak. You work, you get paid, you pay bills, you eat, you sleep, and the next day you do it all over again. That's how his father lived, and his grandfather before him. That's how he planned to live until his body gave out. But in July of 2001, his body wasn't the problem. The problem was the factory. One Friday afternoon, the plant manager called all the operators into the break room. He was a young guy wearing a sharp tie, speaking in corporate buzzwords: restructuring, cost optimization, downsizing. Joe didn't care about the vocabulary. He only cared about the bottom line. The factory was shutting down 3 of its 5 production lines. 120 workers were being laid off, and Joe, despite his 18 years of loyalty, was on that list. The severance package looked decent on paper, but after clearing his maxed-out department store credit cards, paying off the auto loan, and settling an advance he'd taken out for Grace's recent knee surgery, there was barely anything left, just enough to survive for 4 months if they didn't spend a single dime on anything extra. 4 months, 120 days. After that, nothing. The first few days of unemployment felt completely unnatural. Joe would wake up at 6 a.m. out of habit, staring blankly at the ceiling. He'd listen to the kids getting ready for school. He'd hear Grace in the kitchen, packing their lunches. He'd hear the front door click shut when they left, leaving the house swallowed by a heavy, suffocating silence. He pounded the pavement looking for work. He visited other manufacturing plants, local auto repair shops, and an assembly warehouse on the other side of town. Everywhere he went, it was the exact same story. Leave your resume, we'll call you. The call never came. He was 41 years old in a job market that preferred 25-year-olds who worked for half the pay. His age, which should have been valued as experience, had become an obstacle. He tried to hustle. He bought a lot of used tools at a liquidation sale and laid them out on a blanket at the local Sunday flea market. He sold 3 wrenches and a screwdriver. He made $40. Grace suggested selling food. She made incredible slow-cooked pulled pork that the whole neighborhood raved about. They bought pork shoulder buns and homemade barbecue sauce ingredients. They whipped up 50 pulled pork sandwiches. Joe loaded them into a styrofoam cooler and walked the neighborhood streets yelling, "Pulled pork! Hot pulled pork sandwiches!" He sold half. The other half was eaten for dinner because they couldn't afford to waste it. The math just didn't work. Whatever they earned went right back into replacing the ingredients they had used. One Tuesday night, Joe sat alone on the front porch. The house was pitch black. The kids were asleep. Grace had turned off the kitchen light hours ago. The only sounds were the distant hum of the highway and the crickets in the empty lot next door. Joe crossed his arms over his stomach and stared into the night sky. He calculated the 3 months left of his financial cushion. He thought about the school fees coming up in January that he wouldn't be able to afford. He pictured Grace's face every time she counted the dwindling cash left in the envelope inside her dresser. And he realized, with the cold finality of someone who has completely run out of options, that he didn't know how to do anything else besides operate a hydraulic press that no longer existed. Before we find out what happened next, I want to pause for just a moment. I know that on YouTube, most people watch without ever hitting subscribe, and sometimes it's easy to just skip past it. But if you are listening right now and you've already subscribed and liked this video, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It takes a massive amount of time to research these stories, write them meticulously, and produce them for you. Your support means more than you know. Thank you. Now, let's get back to the story because what happens next will completely surprise you. It was the very next day when everything shifted, not because of a miracle, but because Joe went to a place he never would have stepped foot in on his own. Grace had a lifelong friend named Rebecca. Rebecca was married to a Jewish man named David, a successful merchant who owned a fabric and textile shop in downtown Detroit. Grace and Rebecca had been close since high school. They didn't see each other often, but they caught up over the phone every month. That week, Grace had confessed how bad things had gotten. Without a second thought, Rebecca told her, "Tell Joe to come down to the shop. David wants to talk to him." Joe adamantly refused to go. He hated asking for favors. He hated the thought of anyone knowing his desperation. He loathed the idea of sitting across from a highly successful man and admitting he had absolutely nothing. But Grace insisted with that quiet, unyielding fierceness women possess when they know their husbands need help, even if their pride won't let them ask. Just go, Joe. Listening won't hurt you. David's shop was tucked away on a narrow downtown street, sandwiched between a jewelry store and an optometrist. It was a long, deep space, packed to the ceiling with massive bolts of fabric stacked on heavy wooden shelves. It smelled of rich cotton and textile dyes. At the back sat a massive cutting table with a metal ruler built right into the wood and an enormous pair of vintage shears that looked like they belonged to another century. David was back there, measuring a piece of linen for a customer. He was a man in his early 50s, short with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a subtle kippah on his head and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had the calloused hands of a working man, not an office executive. When the customer left, David looked up. "Have a seat, Joe." He gestured to a chair next to the cutting table. Joe sat down. David poured him a cup of hot tea without even asking if he wanted one, then sat directly across from him. "Rebecca told me about the factory. She said you're looking for work and coming up empty." Joe nodded silently, shame tightening like a vice around his throat. David looked at him calmly, not with pity, but with something entirely different. It was the look of deep recognition from someone who had walked through the exact same fire. "Joe, I'm going to tell you something my father told me when I was 20 years old and didn't have enough money to buy bread. And his father told him, and it stretches back much further than that. Are you willing to listen, even if it sounds a little unconventional?" "Yes," Joe replied. David took a slow sip of his tea, then spoke deliberately, like someone carefully unrolling a delicate piece of silk. "My father immigrated to America from Syria in 1955. He landed with one suitcase and $0. He didn't speak a single word of English. He didn't know a soul, except for a distant cousin living in New York's Lower East Side. That cousin gave him a tiny corner in his apartment and told him, 'There are no jobs for you here. You're going to have to invent something.' My father didn't know how to do anything except sell. He had sold fabrics in Damascus since he was 14, so he did the only thing he knew how to do. He took his last $40, bought a small batch of cloth handkerchiefs wholesale, packed them in a canvas bag, and went door to door. He walked 10 hours a day, knocking on doors of houses, offices, and medical clinics. Most people slammed the door in his face, but a few bought. And with the money he made, he bought more handkerchiefs. And with that profit, he bought other items. Step by step, penny by penny, he built a life." Joe listened intently, completely still. "But the secret wasn't the selling," David continued. "The secret was what my father understood about money that the vast majority of the world is blind to. And it's this." David placed his hands flat on the wooden cutting table. 1. The law of the channel, Shefa. In our tradition, we are taught from childhood that money is not a physical object. It's not paper, and it's not a number on a digital bank screen. Money is energy. It is a flow. The ancient sages called it Shefa, a continuous river of abundance that flows down constantly from above. That river never stops. Never. It doesn't matter if there's an economic recession. It doesn't matter if you lost your job. It doesn't matter if you're drowning in debt. The Shefa keeps flowing. The problem is never the river. The problem is the channel. You are the channel. And if your channel is completely blocked, the river flows right past you. Not because it wants to punish you, but because it physically cannot enter. And it gets blocked by two very specific things: what you say and what you believe. David stood up, walked over to a shelf, and pulled down an old, weathered book with gold Hebrew lettering on the cover. He opened it to a page marked with a red silk ribbon. 2. The Power of the Word, Koach HaDiboor. This is called Koach HaDiboor, the power of speech. Every single word that leaves your mouth creates a reality. This isn't poetry, Joe. It's not a feel-good philosophy. It is a spiritual law. When you say, "I can't," you are actively constructing an inability. When you say, "I don't have," you are decreeing scarcity. When you say, "I'm a failure," you are signing a legal contract with defeat. Your words are commands, and everything around you, life, energy, God, whatever you choose to call it, strictly obeys your commands. Joe felt a sharp knot tighten in his stomach because he saw himself completely unmasked in those words. For months, he had been constantly telling himself that he was useless, that he was too old to get hired, that he knew nothing else, and that he was financially doomed. Every single one of those sentences was a massive block in his channel. "But that's still not all," David said. "There is one more thing, the piece that people misunderstand the most. Yet it is the absolute pillar of everything I am telling you today." He sat back down and locked eyes with Joe. To generate money, when you have absolutely nothing, you must do something that sounds completely absurd, but works with the absolute precision of a Swiss watch. You need to give. Joe furrowed his brow. "Give? Give what? I just told you I have nothing." "Exactly," David countered, "and that is precisely why you need to give now more than ever." The silence inside the textile shop grew incredibly dense. Outside, the muffled sounds of the Detroit streets echoed. Trucks driving past, people shouting, but inside it felt like an entirely different dimension. 3. The law of the vessel, Kli, and tithing, Ma'aser. "Listen to me carefully," David said. "Money is currency, and currency must current. It must flow. If you want it to flow toward you, it has to be able to flow through you. If you hoard it, if you clutch it out of fear, if you close your fist tightly around it, the flow stops instantly. But if you release it, even a tiny bit, even the bare minimum, the channel clears out and more flows back in. It's not magic, it's the law of circulation. It's the exact same principle as water. Stagnant water becomes toxic and rots. Flowing water purifies itself. Money behaves the exact same way. When my father arrived in this country with only $40, he did something that anyone else would have called absolute madness. From the very first few dollars he earned selling those handkerchiefs, he took 10% and gave it away. He gave it to a homeless man on the street who had even less than he did. It wasn't just random charity driven by emotional pity. It was a non-negotiable spiritual principle he had carried since childhood. It's called ma'aser, the tithe. You don't give it just to feel like a good person. You give it to keep the channel open. It's a direct message to the universe. I am not afraid to let go. I trust that more is on the way. Joe stared at him, unable to even blink. Something deep inside his logical mind resisted. The blue-collar worker in him, who had meticulously counted every single penny his entire life, wanted to scream that this was reckless insanity. It told him you can't give away what you don't have, that you have to fill your own cup first before you can ever think about anyone else. But another part of him, something much older, speaking not through logic but through raw intuition, told him to listen. And there is a third concept, David added, the one that binds all of this together. It's called the kli, the vessel. Imagine that the Shefa is water and you are a cup. If your cup is tiny, it can only hold a tiny amount of water. If your cup is massive, it holds vastly more. What expands the size of your vessel? Two things: gratitude and vision. Gratitude for what you already have right now, no matter how small, and a vivid vision of what you are building, even if it doesn't physically exist yet. David reached over to the counter, opened a small wooden box, and pulled out 3 ancient, heavily weathered coins. He placed them on the cutting table directly in front of Joe. The first coin opens the channel. Stop decreeing poverty with your own mouth. Every single morning before you face the world, declare, I am abundance. I am capable. The Shefa flows powerfully through me. Say it, even if you don't believe it. Say it, even if you feel completely ridiculous doing it. A seed doesn't need you to believe in it to grow. It just needs you to plant it. The second coin commands you to give. Give anything. Give your time, your physical labor, your specialized knowledge, a hot meal, or an hour of selfless help. It doesn't matter how small the act is. What matters is that you create movement, that your fist opens, and your channel unclogs. The third coin expands your vessel. Give profound thanks for everything you currently have: the roof over your head, the clean running water, your healthy sleeping children, the loyal wife who stands firmly by your side. Give thanks as if every single detail is a magnificent gift you didn't even earn. And then, every single night before you close your eyes, visualize the exact life you desire. Don't stress over how it will happen. Just allow yourself to fully feel what it's like to already be there. That expands the kli. It prepares the vessel to receive the massive influx that is coming. Joe stared down at the 3 coins. They were small, completely worn down by time, and ancient. But right there, on that cutting table, surrounded by vibrant bolts of fabric, they felt like they held the weight of the entire universe. "Does this actually work?" Joe asked, his voice raw and raspy. David smiled warmly, gesturing around the room. "Look around you, Joe. This entire business started with $40 and a canvas bag full of handkerchiefs. What do you think?" Joe stepped out of the fabric shop at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Detroit sun was beating down hard. The downtown streets were bustling with people moving fast. buying, selling, hustling, living. Joe walked slowly to the bus stop. He climbed aboard, took a seat by the window, and as the bus rumbled across the city, he watched the buildings, shops, and cars roll past. His mind was completely consumed by 3 words, 3 laws, 3 keys to a door that had been locked tight for 41 years. Channel, flow, vessel. That very night, sitting in the lawn chair on his porch while the crickets chirped and the house slept, Joe did something he had never done before. He brought his hands together, not to blindly repeat automated prayers out of dry habit, but with deep intention. He closed his eyes and whispered into the dark, feeling completely ridiculous, but at the exact same time feeling incredibly alive. I am abundance. I am capable. The Shefa flows powerfully through me. The words felt foreign in his mouth, like stiff new clothes that hadn't been broken in yet. But something shifted, not on the outside, but deep within him. An internal muscle that had been wound tight with anxiety for years, loosened by a fraction of a millimeter. He repeated it the next morning and the morning after that, every single dawn on the porch, just as the sun began to peek over the neighboring rooftops. Grace spotted him one morning from the kitchen window. She didn't say a word, but that night, while they were washing the dinner dishes together, she quietly asked, "Who are you talking to out on the porch every morning?" Joe hesitated, but Grace was the one person in the world he could never lie to. He told her everything about David, the 3 laws, the ancient coins, and the power of the spoken word. Grace listened intently, drying a plate with a checkered dish towel. When he finished, she looked at him and asked, "And is it working?" Joe shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know yet." Grace set the plate down, looked him dead in the eyes, and said something Joe never expected. "Tomorrow morning, I'm doing it with you." From that day forward, the 2 of them walked out to the porch before dawn. Standing side by side in the morning chill, they would start in silence, and then the words would come, "I am abundance. I am capable. The Shefa flows powerfully through us." Neighbors waking up early for their morning commutes would see them standing there on the porch. They never asked questions, but there was an undeniable dignity in the image of that couple standing together at dawn that required absolutely no explanation. But then came a brutal week. The 3rd week. Joe was still completely unemployed. The cash envelope inside the dresser drawer had grown dangerously thin, and the words spoken on the porch began to feel hollow and empty. One morning, instead of speaking the declaration, Joe just stood there in absolute silence. Grace looked over at him. "What's wrong?" "I can't say it today, Grace," Joe muttered. "It feels like a total lie." Grace reached out and gripped his hand tightly. "David said the seed doesn't need you to believe in it to grow. It just needs you to plant it. Plant it, Joe." Joe looked at her, took a deep, stabilizing breath, and forced the words out of his mouth. He didn't feel them, but he said them anyway. And that, as he would discover later, was more than enough. The very next morning, Joe woke up early, not because he had a job to go to, but because he suddenly had a profound sense of purpose. He walked down the block to the house of old Mr. Gallagher, an elderly neighbor who lived completely alone. Mr. Gallagher had a broken hot water heater that hadn't worked in days, and he couldn't afford a professional plumber. Joe inspected it, replaced a corroded line, cleared out the heating valve, and left it running perfectly. Mr. Gallagher pulled out his wallet to pay him, but Joe firmly pushed his hand back. "It's just a favor, Mr. Gallagher." The old man stared at him in utter disbelief. Joe had never been the type to just do random favors, but something fundamental had shifted. The following week, he fixed a broken garage door for another neighbor entirely for free. He helped the elderly lady who owned the corner grocery store unload heavy delivery crates on a Thursday morning for free. He spent his Saturday helping a friend paint his house for free. Every single selfless act was an invisible coin deposited into a cosmic bank that had no name, but operated with far greater precision than any Wall Street financial institution. And suddenly, the gears of reality began to grind into motion. First, it was old Mr. Gallagher. One afternoon, he knocked on Joe's front door. "Hey, Joe, my nephew owns a large furniture manufacturing plant over in Grand Rapids. He's looking for a skilled industrial machinery maintenance tech. Are you interested?" Machinery maintenance. 18 years in front of a massive hydraulic press had taught Joe more about the inner workings of heavy machinery than any tech school textbook ever could. He went out for the interview and was hired that exact same week. But that was just the baseline catalyst. Every morning before commuting to the furniture plant, Joe stood out on his porch and declared, "I am abundance, I am capable." And every night before falling asleep, he closed his eyes and allowed himself to visualize a totally different reality, not working at the furniture plant, but running something completely his own, something he couldn't fully define yet, but could feel with absolute clarity growing inside him every day. At the furniture factory, Joe quickly noticed a pattern. The production machines broke down constantly, and every time they did, the entire assembly line ground to a halt. Orders were delayed, and the owner was hemorrhaging money. Joe didn't just show up to fix the machines when they snapped. He initiated a strict preventive maintenance schedule. He anticipated the mechanical issues, adjusting and replacing worn parts long before they could fail. Within 2 months, equipment breakdowns plummeted by over 50%. The owner noticed immediately and gave Joe a substantial raise. Now that you see exactly how things began to transform, let me ask you a serious question. Have you ever felt like money actively avoids you? That no matter how grueling your hard work is, an invisible wall blocks your financial flow? I would absolutely love to read your personal story in the comments section below. And if this narrative is reminding you that you too can completely rebuild your life from absolute zero, please share it with someone. Sometimes a story lands exactly when someone needs to hear it most. Now, let's see the ultimate conclusion of Joe's journey. Joe refused to become complacent because his Cly, his internal vessel, was actively expanding. Every single night he visualized something vastly greater, and every single day reality rushed to meet his expectations. While working at the plant, he met an industrial hardware supplier who casually mentioned something that ignited a massive spark in Joe's mind. There are hundreds of small independent carpentry and machine workshops all over the Detroit metro area that don't have an in-house tech to service their machinery. They buy their equipment used, run it until it completely breaks down, and then they have absolutely no idea who to call to fix it. Joe latched onto that sentence. He chewed on it for weeks because it was the exact definition of his core genius: repairing industrial machinery, maintaining it, and keeping it alive. Exactly 6 months after walking into that furniture plant, Joe walked into the owner's office and resigned. But this time, it wasn't a terrifying corporate layoff. It was a deliberate, empowering decision mapped out with grace at the kitchen table over 3 consecutive nights. It was backed by hard numbers, a strategic plan, and the absolute calm of someone no longer operating from raw fear, but from total certainty. He bought professional-grade tools with the money he had meticulously saved. Not the most expensive on the market, but the absolute highest quality he could afford. A comprehensive set of combination wrenches, a digital multimeter, a heavy-duty welding kit with a safety mask, and a rugged plastic toolbox where he organized everything with the exact same precision that now ruled his mind. He loaded it all into the trunk of the old Ford Taurus that still sputtered when it started. He looked at Grace and said, "This car is going to be my corporate office for a while." She smiled and shot back, "And I'm your executive secretary." It wasn't a joke. From that day forward, Grace handled all incoming business calls on their home phone, logged every single message in a dedicated notebook, managed Joe's service schedule, and packed him a lunch every morning in a simple plastic grocery bag. Joe went to a local print shop and ordered a batch of simple business cards on crisp, white cardstock with bold black lettering. Ignacio, Joe Miller, Industrial Machinery Repair and Preventive Maintenance. Home phone number. He systematically distributed them to 30 independent workshops over the span of 2 weeks. He walked in, introduced himself, and left his card. He didn't beg. He didn't plead for work. He spoke with the calm, unshakable confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, because he did. 18 years on a factory floor wasn't just manual labor. It was a hands-on doctorate degree without the piece of paper. 5 workshops called him back. Out of those 5, 3 immediately became regular contract clients. Joe set them up on a monthly retainer model for routine preventive maintenance, a fair, highly competitive price that the workshops could easily afford, but provided Joe with far more income than he had ever earned at the auto parts factory. And most importantly, every single dollar that entered his hands felt fundamentally different. It wasn't a paycheck doled out by a corporation. It was the direct harvest of his own vision, his own calculated risk, and his own wide-open channel. By December of 2002, just a year and a half after that life-altering afternoon inside David's fabric shop, Joe had 12 regular commercial clients on monthly retainers. He had upgraded to a reliable used work van to haul his heavy equipment. He had hired a sharp young kid from the neighborhood who was eager to learn the trade as an assistant, and he had achieved a milestone that meant more to him than any corporate metric ever could. He paid his 3 children's upcoming school fees and sports leagues for the entire year in advance, with his own earned money, without borrowing a single cent from anyone. One evening Joe drove down to David's textile shop, not to seek advice but to express profound gratitude. He arrived just after 7 p.m. as David was locking up the front doors. Joe handed him a warm container of Grace's famous slow-cooked pulled pork, the exact same food he had once tried to sell out of a styrofoam cooler when he couldn't make ends meet. David accepted it with a massive smile. They sat together at the large wooden cutting table, surrounded by the familiar rolls of fabric and the rich smell of cotton that Joe would now permanently associate with the day his entire life transformed. They ate together and drank hot tea out of thick glass cups. "David, everything you told me, it worked," Joe said, his voice completely firm. It wasn't the voice of the broken man who had walked into this shop a year prior, with shame gripping his throat. It was a brand new, crystal-clear voice, the voice of a man who no longer asks permission to exist. David shook his head with a smile. "No, Joe, what I told you didn't work. What worked was what you chose to do with what I told you. I only handed you the keys. You chose to unlock the doors. I only pointed out the location of the river. You are the one who dug out the channel." Joe reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean envelope, sliding it across the table to David. David opened it. Inside was a stack of cash. "It's the Mauser," Joe explained. "Exactly 10% of everything my business brought in this month. I want you to give it to whoever you know needs it most." David stared at the envelope for a long time, his eyes welled with tears, not because of the physical cash, but because of what that cash represented. A man who had absolutely nothing a year ago was now actively giving, and through the act of giving, he was confirming to the universe that his channel was wide open, that the Shefa was flowing, and that the three ancient laws operated with the exact same absolute certainty as the laws of physics, whether a person believes in them or not. David reached back into his small wooden box, pulled out the 3 ancient Syrian coins, and placed them gently in Joe's palm. "I want you to keep these permanently." Joe looked at them, taken aback. "I can't take these, David. They belong to your father." David smiled warmly. "My father passed them down to me on one condition, that I pass them along the moment I found someone who truly understood their power. You understand them, Joe. Take them, and one day, when you cross paths with another man sitting in total darkness, believing he is completely worthless and out of options, hand them to him and tell him exactly what you know today." Joe took the coins and closed his fist around them. They were cold to the touch, but it felt as if they carried the accumulated warmth of all the generations who had held them before him. What Joe learned inside that downtown textile shop, what David passed down to him with the patient certainty of a family guarding a timeless truth for centuries, is something you will never find in a modern finance course. You won't find it in a standard self-help book, and you won't hear it at a mainstream business seminar. Because it isn't a strategy, it is a universal law. And the law states this: money never begins on the outside. It begins on the inside. It begins with what you declare yourself to be. It begins with what you truly believe you deserve. It begins with your absolute willingness to stay open, to flow, to give, and to open your fist, even when every survival instinct inside you screams at you to close it. Jewish people didn't rebuild their fortunes 100 times over because they happened to get lucky 100 times. They did it because they carried these three immutable laws permanently engraved into their souls. Shefa, the eternal flow, exists always. Stop blocking it with your own words. Kli, radically expand your vessel through daily gratitude and vivid vision. Koach HaDiboor, guard your mouth like a king guards the gates of his city, because whatever you allow to pass through those gates will ultimately rule your entire kingdom. Tonight, before you go to sleep, do something profound for yourself. Stand directly in front of the mirror. Look yourself dead in the eyes and declare with absolute clarity, I am abundance. I am capable of generating wealth from absolute zero. The Shefa flows powerfully through me. Then lay down, close your eyes, and allow yourself to fully feel what it's like to already possess everything you are searching for. Not tomorrow, but right now. Sleep deeply in the safety of that feeling, and tomorrow morning, take it a step further. Give. It doesn't matter what, and it doesn't matter how much. Give your time, your assistance, your knowledge, a plate of food, or a favor that nobody even asked you for. Open your fist, allow the energy to circulate, and watch exactly what happens to your life. Do it tomorrow, the day after, and every day following, just like Joe did on an unfinished porch in a working-class neighborhood, with the hum of the highway in the background and an old refrigerator that sounded like a motorboat engine. He had absolutely nothing, but he had three ancient laws, two working hands, and the unyielding decision to never again decree his own misery. Because money was never the actual problem. The problem was always a blocked channel. And now that you know exactly how to open it, the only question left to answer is this. Are you going to clear the channel, or are you going to keep letting the river pass you by? The answer, like everything else that truly matters in this life, belongs entirely to you.